I'm Kat Ledwig, registered dietitian, trained as a chef 15 years ago before I decided to go into healthcare. So I am part of a team that addresses malnutrition related to swallowing disorders. And my business partner, who's a speech therapist, addresses the actual swallowing disorder once we get their nutrition corrected. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm going to be making applesauce.
Applesauce.
Homemade applesauce, yes. And I just talked to someone in the hallway who said, I've never even thought about how applesauce turns into applesauce. And I was like, you should come learn.
Wow, exactly.
So, welcome ladies. Hello.
And I am Nicky Foust, and I own the local franchise of Chefs for Seniors here in the South Bend, Elkhart area. And I am going to be making a vegetable barley soup. I think when most people think of barley soup, they think beef and mushroom, and it's a heavy winter time soup. It's still summer-ish time here, it's just in the fall, so I wanted to do something a little bit lighter, not quite as heavy, and also it's a great meal for healthy cooking on a budget, which is one of our focuses right here today, is healthy cooking on a budget. So I priced out the ingredients that I am going to make this soup with, and it was less than $6 for the entire pot of soup. Now you can, if you really need some meat, you can add some chicken, you can add some beef, you can add some pork, you can add anything you want, but we're gonna go veggie style, and that way everybody's covered for just in case.
Yes.
Should I start explaining?
I think we should start with the fact that it is National Food Safety Month.
It is National Food Safety Month.
So we do have a couple of handouts on food safety. We also have the recipes on the table, so feel free to grab a recipe if you want to follow along. This recipe can be adjusted to meet your needs also. You don't have to do exactly what's in it. So, tell us about food safety.
Food safety,
Chef.
and the handouts that I have talk about why you should care about food safety, foodborne illnesses, things like that. I think a lot of times when we cook at home, we forget about some of the rules and regulations. When you should be keeping things cold, when things need to be hot, what those temperatures are. And so the real kicker for food safety is, it is important because you can make yourself sick and you can make your family members sick if you aren't doing things correctly. And so nobody wants to be sick.
And the older we get, the more our immune systems struggle a little bit. So
Yes.
keeping yourself safe is priority number one, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And your family, of course.
So these are just reminders, and the nice thing about these handouts is they have all the temperatures. They remind you what temperature should my refrigerator be at, what temperature do I need to be cooking my meat to, when I'm reheating my leftovers, what temperature should those be at. So feel free to grab those. There's a couple of them up here. Take them home, stick them on your fridge, remind yourself, remind your family what those should be. And yeah, so try to keep that in mind, because anytime you're cooking at home, there's always a risk of making yourself or somebody sick. So, and we're not cooking, that's one of the reasons I didn't want to do meat today, because meat is one of the really big things that it's easier to make yourself sick with. So vegetables, while they're not 100% safe, and you still do need to watch your temperatures, it's not as bad as a lot of the meat things. So,
And we just want you to wash your fruits and veggies before you eat them.
yeah, anytime you bring anything home from the grocery, even honestly most of the things that are pre-packaged, I still take out and rinse off, make sure they don't have who knows what. Yeah, anytime, especially if you get it out free, which is my favorite way. I will say I love to go to the produce section. The grocery store people know me as the produce test lady. They're like, oh, she's here. Who needs the test? You know, because everything I've got is like from the produce section. It's loose, and they just, you know, because number one, that's the cheapest way to get it, and that's usually got the most nutrition in it. So I love the produce section. So please take those home and wash them, because who knows when it fell on the
So
floor.
what's in your pot there?
What's in my pot here? I started with coconut oil because it's what I had at home, but you can use anything. You can use canola, you can use olive, you can use butter, you can use soy. It doesn't matter, whatever you have. A little bit of oil kind of just helps lubricate things up and get it nice and juicy in there. I put in some chopped onion, which I didn't chop here because I didn't want to cry in front of everybody.
And we don't want you guys to cry either.
I put a little bit of celery, which gives a nice crunch. Even when you cook the celery, it's going to still have a nice texture to it, so it's nice and crunchy, which is lovely. I also have here some sweet potatoes. I have some chopped carrots, and I have some corn in my other little bowl. I have some yellow squash, nice fresh yellow squash, and some red bell pepper. So all that's gonna end up in here. For anybody who hasn't seen barley lately, this is barley. Now this is a pearled barley because pearled barley cooks a little faster. Old-fashioned barley will take about 45 minutes to cook, and we want you guys to actually eat some soup today, so we didn't go with old-fashioned, we went with pearled. So those things, and I did bring also, I put a little jar here in case anybody wants to look. This is my favorite soup stock. It's called Better Than Bouillon, and they do have a low-sodium brand. What I like about this is it adds a lot of extra flavor, and it actually doesn't have as much salt. Even the regular one doesn't have as much salt as a lot of the little bouillon cubes, and it just has a much better flavor than a lot of the other brands, and I've tried a lot of them. So the jars up here of the reduced sodium, if your local grocery store doesn't carry it, tell them to, because it is the best one. Also, what I like about it is I don't have to carry around big honkin' containers of soup stock, and so when, I'm sure at home you've had this experience, you need a half a cup of soup stock, and what do you have? You have this aseptic container of 32 ounces of soup stock, and I can tell you because I've been in a lot of people's homes, guess what's in everybody's refrigerator? An open container of soup stock, at least one, and maybe several that have been there for months and months and months. And the next time you need a half a cup, you're gonna grab it, don't grab it, throw it away.
So be nice to you.
This is great for that because you can use as little or as much as you need. I'm obviously gonna use a bunch today because I'm making a whole pot of soup, so I'll be using, I'm gonna mix it with some water and make 6 cups worth. So that one, it's just way better, I think, than the flavor's better and it's better for you. It's healthy.
And you can buy any flavor. There's a mushroom one if you prefer, and I just learned about this a couple weeks ago. And the mushroom one, if you add it to beef or something like that, it just adds an extra flavor without being mushroomy. Because I'm not a fan of mushrooms, but the flavor in there is so good. And we want you to ask questions if you have questions.
Yeah.
Or ideas, or could you do this instead? Please feel free to ask us questions. So I'm making applesauce. I'm just cutting up my apples. I'm not peeling them. Some people need them peeled. Some people do not. If you leave the peel on, you get a little bit more fiber, which I think we all need a little bit more fiber in our diets. I always recommend to people to increase their fiber intake because that helps you stay regular, and when you're regular, you're happy. I know I didn't talk about it when we're cooking, but everybody knows what I'm talking about. So, and I have this handy dandy little apple slicer here, and then I also brought my knife because I'm cutting my apples into a little bit smaller pieces. Trying to figure out how this works. Okay, here we go. So I have a couple of apples. I'm just cutting them up, and we're just gonna let these cook down. I am taking the cores out because nobody wants seeds in their applesauce. And then I'm gonna add some water, just so we don't scorch the bottom there while those start to soften. And I have 2 different kinds of apples. I picked the least expensive apple at the grocery store because this is healthy cooking on a budget. And September is when apples are in season. So I found Gala apples for 99 cents a pound. I got 2 or 3 pounds, and then I also got some Granny Smiths because they have just such great flavor. So we'll have a little bit more depth of flavor in our applesauce because we're using 2 different kinds of apples. They also cook a little bit different, and they have a little bit different texture, which people don't realize. They think an apple's an apple, and they're slightly different. That's why we bake with Granny Smiths, because they hold up longer under high temperatures. So, and I don't know if you can see me struggling to cut these. They're just a lot sturdier. And if you don't want to play with a knife, this tool is great. You could also just cut your apples in half, and then try to like cut out the middles if you want. Have you guys cut up apples before? Yeah? You ever have trouble with it? It's a pain in the butt. So maybe I should. You do use one of these? Okay. I am a big fan, just because with the Galas, it goes so smoothly. With the Granny Smiths, I'm a little bit worried that I'm going to cut myself, but not terribly.
one thing about not only apples, but all round food, carrots, squash, anything. If it's round, watermelon, the first thing you should do is cut a flat side. It doesn't have to be in half, because I'm sure you all know the big watermelons, it's really hard to cut it in half sometimes.
Yeah.
But if you just cut an edge off, and then put the flat side down on your cutting board, that's gonna be way safer.
So, and I'll show you, I'll see if I can move some of my seasonings out of the way. So, the way I cut an apple is I just cut it typically through the center, and then I cut it in half again. And the great thing about applesauce is I grabbed an apple that's not the prettiest. Produce in the grocery store is typically very, very good looking. I grabbed a cruddy apple because applesauce doesn't matter if your apples are great or not. As long as there are no bugs in it, use your bruised ones because it's going to cook down anyway and you're never going to know. Because you're probably not going to eat an apple that looks like this just as a snack, right? But it's great in applesauce. The flavor's still there and you don't have to worry about that bruise. So I set this on the side. Can you see what I'm doing here? Kind of, okay. And then I just cut here like this. That way you're away from your fingers and you're not, and then the core is right there. You just toss it to the side. All right. So if you don't have one of these handy dandy apple slicers, just keep the knife away from your fingers. That's always the goal.
Yeah, the round foods are obviously hard because
They roll.
it's gonna, it's gonna go all over there, and carrots are the worst because we cut a lot of carrots, and and then you have sweet potatoes. That's another one. Sweet potatoes. I always chop the ends off, and then I, make a flat side and start there. Put that on your cutting board and go from there. So,
And if your dexterity's not great, we don't want you to be playing with a knife if you're a little bit worried you might cut yourself. That's a trip to the ER, and we do not want that. So my rule of thumb is always keep your knife away from your body and your body parts, okay? And if you're not sure or you feel uneasy, don't do it, because that's typically when you have trouble.
and there are a lot of kitchen tools out there to help you do that. There's food choppers, there's immersion blenders, there's a lot of things that you can actually, like she was saying, you can put that half an apple in there, as long as it doesn't have seeds in it, put the whole half an apple in,
Yeah.
blend it up later. Once it's cooked, it's gonna be way easier, just blend it.
And there are tools out there, like a food mill. I don't know if you've heard of a food mill. It's like a strainer, but it's got a little handle in it. And if you put your entire apple in there, if you cut it in half and you throw your apple in there and it cooks down and you've got the seeds in, you throw it into the food mill and you just run that thing around and it doesn't let the seeds go into your applesauce. It works great for tomato sauce, it works great for potatoes. I did a cooking demo last week where we made pureed potatoes without a blender or a mixer. We just used our food mill, poured a little bit of cream in there, and they were perfectly smooth without the extra effort and the extra machinery. So
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes, keeping with the theme of healthy cooking on a budget, you don't want to get, 8 different containers or 8 different, tools that are really for the same thing. So
Right.
find one that works for you, that does the things that you want it to do, and stick with that, because
speaking of tools, do you have that fun potato masher
I do.
that we were talking about? So do you all have a potato masher at home? Do you use your potato masher for only one thing? You don't use it for a bunch? What do you use it for?
We use it for like mixing meatloaf and
It's my favorite for ground meats. If you're making ground hamburger, this is the best tool for that. It works way better than a spatula or a wooden spoon or whatever. So as these start to cook down, I'm just gonna mash them with our potato masher. And now we have one tool that does how many different things, right? Because when I went to culinary school 15 years ago, the rule was you need tools that can do 5 different things. Don't buy a tool that only does one thing, because then it's gonna sit in your cupboard or your drawer and not do you any good. It's kind of a waste of money. So buy tools that you can do everything with. So I would, typically I'm gonna add lemon juice to my applesauce because I firmly believe that we need a little bit of acid in everything that we cook, whether it's lemon juice, lime juice, apple cider vinegar, regular vinegar, even tomato adds a little bit of acidity. you can just buy lemon juice in the container, but I didn't want to have to keep it refrigerated here, so I brought a whole lemon. So I'm going to just cut this and squeeze it in here. All right. So easiest way to do this is just, and if your lemons are really hard, you can throw it in the microwave for a couple seconds and get it warm, and then roll it a little bit, and they'll be super easy to squeeze. I did do the lazy part, and I bought a squeezer so I don't have to get it on my hand.
Actually, there is one trick. If you don't have a lemon squeezer, and I've seen a lot of people use it a lot of times actually, is you just take the half a lemon. Now you're gonna have to fish the seeds out if you're not good in ketchup, but you just take a fork and just stuff it in there, and you just squeeze it, and then, like I said, you've got to straighten the seeds out. But
I've also used a pair of tongs,
yeah.
where you take the handle of the tongs and you put your lemon between the handle and you squeeze it, and that way you don't have to get it on your fingers. All right. There's one.
So I finished in here. We've got carrots, sweet potatoes. The only two things I did not put in, because I'm going to save them to the very end, is corn, because it was basically already cooked, and the red pepper, because if I put it in here and pressure cook it, it's going to end up real kind of mushy and soggy. So I'm going to count on those two things to have a little bit of a different texture when that's finished. But it really shouldn't take long. Are you guys all familiar with pressure cooker? Instant Pot? Kind of, sort of. I see some kind of sort of head shakes. I will say, of all the kitchen tools, and I'm a gadget person, so I've tried lots of them. I won't embarrass myself by saying, trying to guess how many, but I've tried lots. I actually, several years ago, I bought the cheap version of the Instant Pot, which is the brand name that had first come out with this kind of an electric pressure cooker. And I thought, I'm just gonna try the cheap one and see if I even like it, because if I get it, and it may not be anything, it may just be a fad, whatever. I got it and I loved it. I literally drove it into the ground, and I had to get, actually this was a present for me from somebody that knew that I'd killed my other one. It works really fast because it pressure cooks. It is a bit safer than the old school pressure cookers, I think, because
Yes.
they don't blow up as much. They
Yes.
will blow up, but not nearly as much as the old school ones. In the summertime when it's really hot.
It's not that serious.
In the summertime, this is a great way to not heat up your kitchen and still cook food. You know, it'd be like, I know there's those 90-degree days where you're like, I don't want to cook anything. Well, this thing will save your life in that, because it's like, oh, I can just pop it in the Instant Pot, I can cook it. You can, and you just watched me saute. I sauteed it just like you would in a pan on your stove. So
Just like this.
Just like this, and I was gonna say, and you can do this same soup at home. You don't need an Instant Pot. It'll do just fine at home. It takes a little bit longer on your stove, but I love it because then you only have one pot when you're finished. There's not this to do that, and this to do that, and this to do that. You can saute in it. I haven't personally used it to bake, but there are all kinds of recipes where you can actually bake cakes in it and that kind of thing. So it'll do. I have made rice. I have made pasta in it. I've done slow cook. This will also be your crock pot. It'll slow cook for you. I do that sometimes. So it'll fast cook, it'll slow cook, it'll saute, all kinds of stuff. So if you're gonna spend some money, to me, this is worth it.
I would agree with that. I have one as well that I actually got as a wedding gift, and I use it all the time, especially on those days when it's too hot to turn on your stove or your oven. But you can do this on the stove in a normal pot. You're gonna wanna cook it for like an hour, as opposed to this is gonna cook it in 15 minutes or
And then you
so.
guys can have some.
Yes, and so when choosing options that are lower cost for your meals, you want to think about what's in season, and typically the easiest way to find out is to go to the grocery store and see what's on sale. Because if it's in season, typically they have a lower price on it because they have more of it that they need to sell. So if you're at the grocery store and you're like, oh, I see zucchini and I see some tomatoes and I see potatoes are always sort of inexpensive, you can make roasted veggies, because all those veggies will roast. You can make soup, you can make side dishes, and then our grain that we chose is barley, because it's an underutilized grain. And one of the things I do as a dietitian is try to get people to eat more whole grains. Because we think of starches as, oh, you have your rice, everybody knows about rice, but nobody knows about barley. And it's very, very similar. It's got a crunchy texture. And you want to add some variety into your diet. Whole grains are really, really good for your health. And so I always recommend that you eat a whole grain every day, whether it's oats, barley, brown rice, quinoa, and then just some of your more traditional ones like wheat. You can buy whole wheat, all kinds of. Are you all familiar with most of those? You've seen them in the grocery store? Okay. Great.
Yeah, there are some really a little bit more off the wall ones. I've actually recently started working with a grain called Fonio. It's Fonio, and it
Never
has
heard of it.
it actually has a higher protein content than even quinoa, which is really touted as being the high protein grain. And it works really well. It's a teeny tiny grain, so I actually put it in my granola bars a lot, but you can put it in soup just like any grain. You can actually use it like rice and have just some sauteed veggies or put some meat with it, use it as a base for stir fry, any of that stuff. So, I find that kind of helps keep people interested. You know, you get bored eating the same thing all the time. And so I like to use all the new grains, but a whole grain every day is a good idea.
Throw me a little more water in there. I don't cook on an induction burner very often, so making sure I keep this. And applesauce, it has quite a bit of water in it, but you want to keep enough water in it so that it continues to moisten and not dry out, because apples will burn just like anything else if they get a little too dry. So I'm just going to toss a little more liquid in there.
Does anybody have questions about anything about like, hey, what about this? Like, I having trouble with doing this or cooking at home or any of that stuff?
No?
Ingredients, anything that's, you're like, I saw this in the store the other day. I actually had a gentleman tell me just a little bit ago that they don't sell barley in the grocery store anymore, and I was like, yeah, they do. I bought this barley at the grocery store just the other day. So, and don't be afraid to ask your people at the grocery stores either. They'll get stuff for you.
Yeah.
If you want to get stuff and you've got your local grocery store that you shop at and they don't carry the products that you like, just ask them. Say, hey, I really want to order this. Can you get a different barley? Can you get old-fashioned barley? And they'll get it in for you. So,
Is anyone worried about the fact that I put skins in here with the apples? Does that bother anyone? Because I know some people are like, nope, we got to peel those things before we cook them. A little bit?
Yeah.
You're like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I recommend is when you're done cooking this down so your apples are nice and soft, throw it in your food processor, and that'll help with that a little bit. We have a little blender that we're going to use just to make sure this is one consistency, so when we serve it to you, there won't be any chunks. My business partner and I address people who have swallowing problems. These skins would be a huge issue for anyone that has a swallowing problem. So we want to make sure that these are not chunky if I were going to give that to someone. So the best way to do that is with a blender of some kind. And the great thing about apples is that there's a lot of liquid in here, so when you're blending anything, you want to make sure there's plenty of liquid. Thank you.
sure.
We're not there yet, but we're getting
no
there.
worries.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't know, has everybody seen an immersion blender? These are great. If you don't know if you've always been like, I don't know, like, what's that good for? Smoothies? Like, this is great for all kinds of stuff. It's great for applesauce. It is great for soups. It's great for gravies. It's great for, I mean, anytime. In fact, I do make some soups, and I just like them really pureed. So I always use this. Again, it's saving you another pot. You don't have to put it in your food processor and grind it all up, and then you got to put it back in something else. You just stick this right in here.
And most of these stick blenders that they sell now, they add an attachment that's a little mini food processor. So you don't need a full-size food processor if you're just processing a little bit. So you just take your scoop, you put it in there, you put your blender on, and it blends it in your little container, and then you have one serving. I recommend it for my clients that have swallowing difficulty. If they need a tool that blends well, we just have them either get one of these or another high-powered blender, because I want to say mine costs like $35 for the stick blender, which is not super terrible. There are some blenders out there that are $400. Nobody's gonna afford that. That's, you know, it's kind of a novelty. So we wanna find tools and ingredients that are cost effective for you and that you're gonna be able to make a meal that's not gonna break the bank at the end of the day, including your tools.
Yeah, well, and this is another one that I think you could just use it for one thing. If you're a smoothie person and you love making your smoothies, that's a great way to do it too, but it really is good for a lot of other things. Like it's, yeah, I love mine. In fact, the naughty side of me whips whipped cream with this. So you get your heavy whipping cream and you just put it in a little cup and you can whip just a little bit. You know, I don't want the whole bucket of whipped cream, just a little bit for desserts.
But it does the job. So I'm gonna add a little bit of honey to my applesauce because some people like their sweet. And while honey is still a sugar and it's still gonna, if you have diabetes, it's going to increase your sugar a little bit, but honey also has some other good benefits to it that regular plain sugar does not. So if you need a sweetener, honey is a really good option. So I'm just gonna add just a little bit here. And then, how many of you like your applesauce with cinnamon in it? Yeah, me too. So,
And that goes for other spices too.
Yes.
You can nutmeg, you can
so I
clove.
brought all my spices. So I have a pumpkin pie spice that I don't know why I have it in a baggie. I must have taken it somewhere for another cooking demo. You can use pumpkin pie spice. The ingredients in pumpkin pie spice are allspice, clove, ginger, nutmeg, and cinnamon. You can season your desserts any way you want. Or you can just get cinnamon and throw that in. It's gonna be delicious no matter what. Some of the seasonings like allspice and clove are really, really strong. So you don't wanna use too much because that's all you're gonna taste and then you won't eat your delicious whatever it is you're making. So just use a little bit of some of those stronger spices and always smell them beforehand so you know what sort of a flavor that you're adding. Thanks.
I did bring too just a couple of other, I was thinking about kitchen tools and some of that stuff this morning, and I brought a set of, I would say, if you're gonna be chopping anything at home, a set of really good shears is another thing that's great to have. It uses a little bit different muscles than your knife and your cutting board, and so if you're chopping chives or some of the other the fresh herbs, you can just chop them with your kitchen shears. I actually have a really heavy duty set that you literally use on like chicken pieces to take the bones and get the bones out. So you can get them that are really strong, and it's nice to, sometimes it's just easier to use than an actual knife.
And that goes for other veggies as well. Like if you have green beans or asparagus and you don't want to use your knife because you're just not feeling it's the right option, a good pair of kitchen scissors might be better for even trimming some of those other veggies that you have on hand. And most of us have a nice pair of scissors hanging around that are sharp enough.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and they don't have to technically be kitchen scissors either. They
yeah.
can just be scissors.
I just wash mine in the sink, soap and water, and then let them dry, and then they're good for the next. I use my scissors in the kitchen all the time. So
Yeah, as I say, I've definitely known people that have had like, these are my kitchen scissors and these are my office scissors, and just, that's another great tool to have around.
yeah. So the other thing I like about fruit is that you can make fruit sauce out of any kind of fruit for the most part. If you wanna, and you could mix it with apples. We were talking about cranberry and I forgot the cranberries.
Yeah.
So you can throw dried or whole cranberries in here. If you do fresh whole cranberries, you're gonna need a little more sugar because they're very tart. They're very good for you, but not everyone can stomach raw cranberries. So the dried ones are nice because sometimes they're sweetened. You can add pears to this, you can add peaches to this, you can add strawberries. You can add literally any other fruit that you want, and it's gonna have a nice bold flavor of, if you have blueberries, if it's July and you have fresh blueberries, throw a handful in here. It's gonna turn a pretty color, and if you're gonna blend it or put it in your food processor anyway, why not?
Yeah, and it's, you know, actually both things that we're making today are a great way to kind of use up stuff that you have in your fridge that's maybe left over from doing another recipe that was very clear. You need this, and you need this, and you need this, and if it's, especially if it's a brand new recipe, something you've never done before, you bought all these things, and now you've got a half a bag of mango that you don't really know what to do with. Well, you can throw it in with some apples and make apple mango sauce. It's great.
Yeah.
Soup is the same way. You can use anything, that half a bag of carrots and that one potato you've got left. Actually, one of the things I tell people all the time, because a lot of people will get those rotisserie chickens, and you eat it, and you make a little chicken salad, or you just eat the chicken and whatever, and then you have this kind of half of a rotisserie chicken that you're like, well, I got all the good parts off. Throw it in a pot with some boiling water, boil it off, all the bones are gonna fall out eventually. Take the bones out and cook up some veggies and throw those in, and you've got a great pot of soup. And guess what? You just used something that you were probably just gonna sit in your fridge for 3 weeks, and then you were gonna throw it away, so.
And if you're making this soup, throw your extra chicken in there. If you've got some beef stew meat in your freezer, throw that in there.
Yeah.
You can add almost any flavor to this soup and turn it into whatever you want. You can add sweet potato and pumpkin and make it more of a fall vegetable barley soup. You can,
Yeah.
all kinds of options.
Yeah, well, we talked about the beef and mushroom, which is a great winter option. In the middle of winter, it's a great hearty, you know, filling soup that'll definitely warm you up on the inside, as they say. But you could do anything you want. You know, you can use that half a can of tomatoes, use that tomato paste that you open, go ahead and throw that half a thing of chicken stock that you've got in the fridge, as long as it's not too old.
And we put tomato on the recipe, but we're not using tomato today, which some of you may have noticed.
Yeah, I didn't use a can of tomatoes.
Part of that is just, it wasn't something that she got at the grocery store, and so we just wanna show you, you can change things up a little bit here and there. And the other thing about soup, if this comes out and it's too dry, what are we gonna do?
Add a little water.
Add a
That's
little
one of the
water.
other things I like about this kind of a stock is like, well, I'm gonna add a little more water and then it's all watered down and it's not very good. Well, put a little bit more in and that'll brighten it back up and give it a bit more flavor. And then, you know, and you can, you know, if you got a little bit of sour cream that was left over from your mashed potatoes the other day, throw it in the soup. It's fine. It's not gonna hurt it.
That stock you were
Yes.
holding up. Yes. Is the sodium on that pretty high?
There's two kinds. There's regular kind and there's a reduced sodium, and I did put the jar for the reduced sodium down here so you can look at what it
Okay.
is.
Yes.
It's less than a lot of them.
Okay.
It's not zero because it
Yeah,
is soup
no.
stock, but it's a lot less than a lot of them. And this one will have like teaspoon per teaspoon. This one adds a lot more flavor than a lot of them. What,
Okay.
you know, when you start, you taste it, you put your bouillon cube or your, you know, can or whatever of stock, and you put it in, and you're like, oh, it just doesn't quite have that bounce, that flavor that I like. This one really does, and so yes, it does have some sodium. This one is not the low sodium one. This one is the regular, the other one is the low sodium, but 1 teaspoon of this one has 680 milligrams. Well, I've seen plenty of them that are
Oh, yeah.
way
Yeah.
over 800.
Yeah, yeah.
So this one I just, and they have, we were talking earlier, they've got the beef, they've got the chicken, they got mushroom, they got roasted garlic, they've got vegetable, they have all kinds of flavors.
What is the brand? Because you said it has so much more flavor than some.
It's called Better Than Bouillon.
Better?
Yes, it's called Better Than Bouillon.
So let's talk about the sodium
Yeah.
a little bit,
Yeah.
because we recommend that people cut back on sodium for a lot of reasons, right? It could be high blood pressure, it could be your kidneys are struggling a little bit, it could be that you're retaining some fluid, it could be that your doctor said, hey, your sodium levels are out of whack, you need to cut back on your salt, right? So what happens if you're making soup and you accidentally add too much salt, right? Do you throw the whole pot away? I would say no. My trick is, let's cut a potato in half and throw the potato in there. The potato will absorb some of that salt, and then you take it out and you throw it away. That way you've saved your soup. It has decreased the sodium content by a little bit, and now your soup is less salty. And if you need to do it again, throw that other half of the potato in there and do it again. Because soup is great. You can cook it literally to death, and it's still gonna taste delicious at the end of the day.
In fact, most of the times it tastes better.
Yeah.
The more you cook it, I'm sure you've all had chili that you're like, oh, the next day, this is even better than
Yes.
yesterday.
Yes. Any other questions?
While we're on the sodium subject,
Yeah.
I would love to chat about to decrease your sodium from the very beginning without using salt. Yes, you can use low sodium soup stocks. I always recommend using fresh vegetables, because even when you go to the frozen aisle and you look at all the options for your frozen veggies, you want to get the one that's just vegetables. Don't get the one that's got sauce on it. Don't get the one that's flavored Italian style. Don't do that, because I guarantee if you look at the sodium, it's going to be off the charts. So if you're trying to decrease it, start with just fresh vegetables. If you're at home and you're making something, you can always add your salt to your heart's content. But if you already start with things that have a lot of sodium in them to begin with, then you don't want to add any salt. And if you start that flavor and you're testing it and you're like, oh, it needs a little salt, you're just going to be adding more sodium on top. So fresh veggies. If you go frozen, get plain vegetables.
So I want to add also, sometimes when you're tasting your food and you feel like it needs more salt, it actually needs a little bit of acid. So try adding some vinegar or some lemon juice first, and just a little bit, because sometimes that can change the flavor profile enough that you don't need to add any more salt.
It's a show and a book, but it's acid, salt, fat, and heat.
Yes.
And that's where I learned about all this.
Yes.
Yeah, she's
Yes.
amazing, actually. She
Yeah.
does have some, and that's, if anybody hasn't watched that, she has some great tips and tricks about how to make things taste good and just
Yes.
use real food. The other thing is, when you're doing veggies, I don't recommend canned vegetables at all if you can help it.
I
But-
do as a dietitian, just because sometimes a canned vegetable is better than no vegetable.
True.
So, but I always say rinse them. Dump them in a strainer and rinse them, so you rinse some of that salt off. So I just have to, disclaimer there.
And I agree, that is true. A canned vegetable is better than no vegetable. I did use a can partly because I wanted to show you guys, there are some that have no salt added. And there's quite a few different brands and styles, and even the grocery brand, the R Family, the Martin's Carries, has some no salt added. So if you have to choose between green beans that only have all the salt or something else that doesn't have salt, pick the no salt. Because this has, for the whole can, it has, if you drain it, which I did, I drained it and rinsed it, 5 milligrams, which is negligible.
And sometimes it's just about reading the label, and they're making the labels smaller and smaller. And it's very frustrating, because I recommend people read labels all the time, right? Well, if you can't see the label, what good does it do you, right? So they have changed some of the things on the label. So like, you can see the calories on this label as opposed to 5-10 years ago. You couldn't find the calories on there because it's smaller. Well, I'm not so concerned about the calories a lot of times. I'm more concerned about how much carbohydrate is in it and how much sodium is in it. So those are a little bit smaller, so trying to find those items on there is gonna be more important than anything else. And you brought seaweed. Tell me about the seaweed.
I did bring seaweed. This is actually just something I had it in my cupboard this morning, and I was like, oh, I should bring some of this. I love this chopped up, and I will chop some up so you guys can try it if you want. On top of soups, on top of rice, on top of my veggies. This one does have a little sea salt on it. I didn't look at the sodium on this. But this is a great way, too, to add just that little extra pop of flavor. Also nutrition. Seaweed is actually really good for you. I tend to be a little bit of a weirdo, and I legit eat these just like chips, and I just eat them like potato chips. But not everybody's into that. They're really great, and they will add that little extra salty flavor to your soups and stuff.
So I also want to add, this is a trick I learned when I was becoming a dietitian. If you add a strip of seaweed, if you're cooking beans, if you start with dried beans and you soak them and then you cook them, if you add a strip of seaweed, it helps break down those carbs that cause you to have gas. So you don't have to necessarily eat the seaweed in it, but if you put that in there, it'll help those beans break down while they're cooking, so that maybe you don't need the Beano like you did before.
And it doesn't, I would say if you just put a strip in, you're not gonna taste it. It's not gonna
And
taste anything.
typically seaweed is a really good source of iron. So for anyone that's anemic, if you can figure out how to add seaweed into your diet, it is not gonna hurt you. It's actually gonna really, really benefit you because your body can absorb more of that iron from real food than you can from a pill. And as we all know, if you're on an iron supplement, those are not pleasant. So I say get it from your food if you can.
Does anybody smell soup? Is it just me? Like I smell soup.
All I can smell is apples
Apples.
and cinnamon, so. All right, I am going to plug the mixer in and blend this so we can get a little bit, some of those apple skins cut up into smaller pieces. So if I were making this for a person that had swallowing disorder, I would have peeled the apples and not included the peel because I don't want to introduce anything that's going to cause you to have any trouble swallowing. But if you don't have a swallowing disorder, the peels are great for you because they're great additional fiber. The apples themselves are great fiber, but the peels are as well.
So what's in the apple peel that would,
It's just a little bit harder for your body to digest,
okay,
so it takes a little bit longer for it to hit your bloodstream because your body is busy breaking that down. And when I say we, dietitians want you to eat more foods that are harder for your body to break down because that helps keep your blood sugar lower and more stable for long periods of time. So if you do struggle with maintaining your blood sugar, we want you to increase your fiber and increase the amount of protein you eat. That way your stomach takes longer to digest and keeps your blood sugar more stable. Yes. So we like skins and peels on fruits and vegetables. However, if you have a GI disorder and your doctor says don't eat those things, listen to what your doctor says so that we don't cause you any trouble. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Got some good ones so far.
I have never had a doctor say don't eat those things, but I am aware sometimes that I have difficulty swallowing some things.
Tell me more.
Well, I don't know what else to tell you.
Okay.
It isn't all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, sometimes I feel like I can't eat.
It gets stuck.
It's hard to swallow.
Okay.
Is there a certain texture that you notice it with? Is there a certain texture that you notice, or like is it meat? Like is it a hard potato, or you know?
I don't know if I can identify any particular food.
Okay.
So is it
but
hard to,
I probably ought to pay attention to that.
Yeah, you should.
hard to
So-
swallow, or does it feel like it gets stuck?
It feels like it's getting stuck.
How high? Right here, you're pointing here.
Pretty high, yeah.
Have you ever talked to a doctor about that?
Okay.
Have you?
I've had an upper GI a number of years ago.
Well, they do a swallow study.
So an upper GI is essentially from here to here.
Oh,
Okay. There's another one called a modified barium swallow that's from here to
Oh,
here.
Okay.
So if there is any changes in the physiology of the mechanism of swallowing, they would identify it in the x-ray that's from here to here. So I would encourage you to just mention it to your doctor next time you're there. There are some structural things that could be going on, or it could be related to reflux. There could be a lot of things. So I'd just mention it and he can probably steer you in the right direction.
This is my business partner, everyone. She's a speech therapist, so I was hoping that we would have some questions for her as well. So if you have questions about anything related to swallowing, we have the expert here today also. So thank you.
I think the upper GI was more for an acid reflux they were looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And would that be part of the difficulty in swallowing?
Could be.
It very likely could have.
I can talk to you afterwards.
Okay.
And actually, I would, while she's blending, I have one more little tool. This is like a food processor, but it's just a little bitty one. So for those of you that might be living alone and you're like, I don't need a big old food processor, I carry this one with me when I go to clients' houses because it's great. It's just little bitty. It works brilliantly to just do just a little bit, whether it's, a little bit of applesauce, a little bit of something that's really hard to chop for a soup, anything like that. Get yourself a little bitty one, it's great. It works wonders, and it'll help you not to have to try garlic. Just a couple pieces of garlic, it's a real pain in the patoot to try and mince garlic, just throw it in.
Yeah, and so, okay, that's one of the things I do recommend. A garlic press is great because who wants to chop up a little tiny piece of garlic into little tiny pieces, right? It's really difficult.
Yeah.
A tool like that, or you can buy, I used to have one, I don't know what happened to it, I wanted to bring it, but it's a little chopper, it's got a little piece you put on the top to hold the food in, and then you just hit it, and it chops your food really nicely. If you have one of those, it's great for so many things, because if you gotta chop an onion, then you don't end up crying as bad, because all of that is contained in the little machine, and it's great for garlic as well.
That is another great tool. And I have one of those little choppers. I use it for nuts, but it's great for just a little bit. Even your tomatoes, you're making just a little bit of salsa, chop some tomatoes, chop some onions, chop some herbs. It's great for other herbs too.
Yeah.
Because again, those can be really hard to hold on to and chop in this little tiny space. So
Can you put a name on this chopper, because there are all kinds out there?
Slap chop.
And I've tried, I think, half of them.
Have you? And do you find that some of them don't work very well?
Yeah.
Mine I got from the Pampered Chef
That's mine.
years
That's
ago.
what
I was wondering if they can get bigger ones though. Sometimes I need a bigger, you know.
Yes, so in that case, I would recommend something closer to a food processor that's a little bigger than the one she has,
Yeah.
because you can just put it in there with the lid on and just pulse it and get it to the consistency you want.
But I
Yeah.
like that little one for.
I like I said, I wanted to bring, I can't find it. I've been looking for it for weeks. We did a cooking demo like 4 weeks ago, and I tore my house apart. I can't find the thing. My husband's like, I think you gave it away. How would I do that? But Pampered Chef makes a really sturdy one.
Okay.
Amazon has one called Slap Chop.
I'm sorry?
Slap Chop, like you slap.
Top.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. How are we on the soup?
we're getting there. It
Okay.
just needs to come back to a boil. I put the corn in, I put the bell pepper in, and it just needs to come back to a boil, and then we'll be ready to go.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll be ready to.
Right. And I'm doing pretty well here as well. Who would like to try some applesauce? We're gonna get it cooled down just a little bit, and then we'll share some with you.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
This is almost ready too. Yeah, we're almost ready to
All right.
get you guys something to eat.
Well, thanks for joining us, everyone.
I wanna know if anybody else has more questions.
Yeah, we like questions. We like to help you solve your problems.
And is that a food process? What is that you
So-
just?
This is a stick blender,
Yeah,
otherwise known as an immersion blender.
yeah.
So these are really wonderful because nowadays, they used to just sell them like this. Nowadays, they sell them with attachments. So this one, it comes apart right here,
Which I would recommend.
and you can attach it to another attachment that has like a little food processor bowl. So same kind of deal where you put the food processor bowl on here and you pulse it and it'll process your food. And so this is like a blender, but in your hand. And you can just put it in your pot and blend
What is the
that way.
brand on that?
This is a Braun
Braun.
But there's lots of different brands.
And what is
Mine's
it called? A Braun what?
stick blender.
Yeah. Or
Oh,
immersion
yeah.
blender.
What blender?
Stick.
Stick blender.
Yep.
Okay.
And those are for heat, for hot and cold, correct?
Correct.
I
Yes.
think some of them may not be for hot.
So
Yeah.
my partner and I, we help people with dysphagia, so we help prepare pureed foods that are more palatable for people. And what we have found is that when you blend things hot, which most companies recommend you don't do because it increases pressure, so you don't want the lid on all the way, that's why these are great. Things blend better when they're hot or warm. When they're cold, it takes more time and more liquid added. So if you have a blender and you wanna put something hot in it, just make sure it's vented on the top so it doesn't explode. That's like safety first.
Yeah.
Safety first always, no matter what. Okay, any other questions? So yes, my stick blender is a Cuisinart. Doesn't really matter which brand you buy. And mine also has a whisk attachment, so I can attach a whisk to it and just,
Wow.
not that you need it, because this will do that also, yeah. You can mix eggs to make scrambled eggs with it, you can mix your pancake batter, you can make whipped cream, You can, what else can you do with your stick blender? You can make any kind of soup, pudding.
Yeah, it's great for pudding, it's great for, yeah, I mean, anything that you're gonna mix anyways, or if you would put it in a food processor, this is just an easier way for almost everything to do it. And it saves the dishes, then you don't have to wash your food processor.
Or your blender, because they take up a lot of space, and sometimes if you gotta get your hand in there, it's not safe, right?
Yeah.
So this is great, because what we're gonna do is we're gonna remove this piece, and then we're gonna rinse that piece so that it doesn't get the motor wet, and you know you got it all the way clean. The other way to clean these is to put it in a cup that has soap water in it, and just pulse it in there, and it cleans it without any trouble also.
What's the container that the soup is in? Is that a pressure cooker or?
This is a pressure cooker, this is an Instant Pot brand, but you don't have to get an Instant Pot brand, there's lots of brands. I've used multiple different kinds of brands and they all work the same pretty much. There's some that have more things that you can cook and other, you know, there's some that have like 17 different settings. This one actually has an air fryer lid that you can put the lid on and it'll air fry too, but if I recommend these for sure.
I need to get a new one. I still have the old one that you just put it on the fire and it goes.
Yes, these are a little safer than those.
Yes.
These are,
Yeah, don't do that.
And they have safety measures on them that so you know when you should and shouldn't open it.
right, I was gonna say, it actually won't, like if you don't get the lid put on all the way, it won't pressure cook.
Oh, yeah.
It just won't even do it.
Yeah.
So you can't
And I
goof that up.
think it'll beep at you also.
It does, it beeps at you all the time. It's a talker.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, if the lid isn't on all the way,
It won't pressurize.
oh, okay.
Yeah, if you try to cook with it on a pressure, it just won't do it unless it's safe to do it.
How many more of your
Yes, I have
cups?
Now, is this one, I mean, I assume you have it plugged in?
Yes, it is
Yes.
plugged into this little guy. Yeah.
So we only have one burner and we wanted to do two things, so we knew we were gonna have to improvise a little bit.
Okay.
So this tool is great because you can saute in it as well as pressure cook.
Okay.
Yes.
Like this? Just gonna scoop
No,
it.
I think I'm good with the spatula here. It might take me a little more elbow grease, but that's okay. And I already,
I have this one too, it's a little more smooth.
I'm gonna taste it to make sure it tastes okay before I feed it to you all.
Oh, isn't that nice of her? And anybody that wants to come and get some soup, it's ready anytime you guys wanna come. It's, come on up, get some soup.
It's still
hot.
chunky. If you want it perfectly smooth,
Well,
putting it in a blender is,
do you wanna try the other one?
I like a little more texture in my applesauce. If you don't need it perfectly smooth, texture's not a bad thing. Have any of you made applesauce from scratch before? No?
Yeah.
Long time ago.
Only, it was in the old days when we had a sieve,
Yeah, I was actually talking about that before you got here.
Oh, is that right?
On occasion, I will use a food mill to make it as well, because it gets out all the stuff that you don't need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I have my mother, so it's a real antique.
Yeah. I
Slurping, yes.
love my
Okay,
food
So
mill.
be careful because it's hot.
Slurp.
At least mine. Yeah, I thought about spoons, but I thought that's just more waste.
Yeah, I'll take some.
Okay.